Everybody's in the house tonight. Everybody's in the house tonight. Let's do the damn thing. Let's do the damn thing. Everybody's in the house tonight. Let's go.
I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
I've been involved in politics for 40 years, but I have never seen anything like what is being unleashed in Gaza in full public view while the world watches it unfold. 10 days of relentless airstrikes, 1 in 1,000 people murdered by the Israeli government in a week, open declarations of siege, 24 hours of fuel, electricity and water left, collective punishment on innocent people, all illegal, all war crimes. And when the EU should have been arguing for a ceasefire, for the upholding of international law, for the protection of civilians, Ursula von der Leyen touches down in Tel Aviv to photo op the preparation of a genocide and says Europe stands with Israel now and in the days to come. How dare she? She has no authority in foreign affairs matter. She does not speak for me. She does not speak for Ireland, and she does not speak for the citizens of Europe. We stand for peace. We stand for justice for the people of Palestine and for the upholding of international law. It's long past the time that this woman exited the stage. It's time for her to go and for the International Criminal Court
So
to
the debate is closed.
Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabby Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays and Fridays, and you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Rumble. And welcome back, guys, and happy Tuesday. That was Claire Daly, who a lot of you are very well familiar with. I've had her on the show before. She's very vocal. She doesn't back down. And we have so much to talk about tonight. I wanted to start off with that for the cold open, because I want you to see that there are people out there that are speaking out and are speaking against like these atrocities that are happening to the Palestinian people. So Claire is based. Got to start off with Claire. All right, I want to get to some of the comments in the chat. We'll shout out patrons. We'll show that thumbnail, and then we'll go ahead and dive right into tonight's stories, because we do have a lot to discuss. Now, I pinged this one because Sean said, but yeah, Gray Zone got popped for showing a Hamas video. I don't know if that was earlier today or not, but yeah, you can't show the videos. I think I've been pretty good about that. But yeah, that's unfortunate. That really does suck. Let me go ahead and start giving shout outs to people. Shout out to Dr. Nick, says Steve Harvey telling me I can get $6,000. I don't know what Steve Harvey's talking about now. I don't know what he's talking about. Shout out to Miguel, says hi, Dr. Nick. What's going on, Lawrence, who's a Sabby member, says hello to Miguel. Greetings, Sakudo, says what's good, y'all? What's good, Sakudo? You tell me. Help me help you. Just kidding. Little Jerry Maguire reference there. Shout out to Luz, says to Karen, I haven't heard anything over the massive chorus of laughter at it. Shout out to Steve, also giving a shout out there to Miguel. Greetings, Dwayne says person turquoise. Oh, okay, see, that's emojis. StreamYard hasn't adapted to emojis. But what's up, Dwayne? Shout out to whoever says, yep, cue the malfunctions. Greetings. New Sheep says, this is getting heavy. Yes, it is getting heavy. Shout out to RB says, bring Abby Martin on your show. I have reached out to Abby Martin a couple of times. I have not heard back. Thank you. Corey sends a lot of love for Claire Daly there. Shout out to Venti Cafe. He says, okay, we can't say that on here, but shout out to Venti Cafe. What's going on? Irhana says, Israel is Nazi Germany. We've come full circle. Isn't it crazy how this is happening all over again, but to a different group of people? What's going on? Bad Cookie says, MSNBC told me not to trust Claire Daly. Surprise, surprise. Shout out to CBC Voters says, happy Tuesday, Sabby Sabs. What's going on? Eric, who's a Sabby member, says, start us off right and hit the like. I like the sound of that. Shout out to Pachico, who's also a Sabby member, says, hallelujah, Claire Daly. Greetings, V sends love. Shout out to Desert Mantis says, troublemaker. That woman is a troublemaker. Greetings, Myra says, hi, everyone. Shout out to Deneen says, hey, y'all. Greetings, Karen says, hi to Dr. Nick. I think I shouted you out twice, Karen. Shout out to Fu. Oh, we see what? Two good people in that body, her and Mick Wallace. Mick Wallace is also based. Yes, he is. Shout out to Jonathan says, I love you, Sabby. Love you too, Jonathan. Greetings, Travers says, Claire is awesome. Makes me a proud CI. Shout out to Mr. Ebby says, free, free Palestine, free, free, free Palestine. Greetings, Corey, who's a Sabby member, says, hello, all. Shout out to, I want to make sure I don't hit the same person again. Desert Mantis sending love to Ilhanna, Myra, Steve, Dwayne, Lawrence, and Bad Cookies. Greetings, Saul says, do it. Do what? Greetings, Louise, who is a Sabby member, says hello to Eric. Hope you are all well. Shout out to Carrie, says Dick Butkus. Don't know who that is. What's that's all about? Greetings, Tony. This is just theater. I wonder how many of you are being entertained by these satanic dialects. How many viewers know of the truth, freedom, health movement that calls out the hypocrisies of this world? I don't know, Tony, but I do know not everyone that is watching is religious. Shout out to Marcel, says, greetings from Canada, Sabby. Oh, I got a Canada story tonight. So stay tuned. Got a Canada story tonight. Shout out to Ashura, says Gray Zone is dope. I agree. Greetings, Bebo, says silence is complicity. No to genocide and forced displacement. Greetings, Lorez, says sup, Ashura. Shout out to Smooth, says hello, everyone. And what's going on, Octaslash? Hi, everybody. All right. And with that, let's go ahead and give a shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. You're keeping the lights on around this piece. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators. There's also Sabsters, Sabbies. Look at all those guys. And of course, members. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. And I want to give a special shout out to new Sabby patrons. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for Natalie Williams. Dun, dun, dun. All right. Like I said, we have a lot to discuss tonight, so let's go ahead and share that thumbnail for you, because I think you'll be interested in these stories, if not all of them, maybe at least one of them, maybe. All right, tonight we are discussing Glenn Greenwald speaks out. Woof! That is in reference to censorship. You know, Glenn is obviously very vocal about that subject. He doesn't shy away from it. We're going to talk about that interview that he had recently where he's calling out some hypocrisy here. We're also going to get into Russell Brand versus Justin Trudeau. Holy smokes. I know some of you live in Canada. And you may already know this if you live in Canada. But for a lot of people watching that live in the US, they may not be aware of all of the things that Justin Trudeau is trying to do. It's like he's trying to make Canada like, what do you call it? What's the 1984? That's what it seems like. Like he's just trying to keep tabs on everybody that is against the status quo and what they're doing. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to discuss Joe Biden split from Janet Yellen and Vivek Ramaswamy. Same topic, but it seems here there is an apparent split when it comes to this crisis that's happening in Israel and Palestine and what the U.S. should do and if the U.S. should be involved at all. So these 3 interviews took place this week, and we're going to chime in and talk about that. We're also going to cover the recent attack that just happened to the hospital in Gaza as well. So we're going to touch on that. I got a lot of things to add into that story, but it's all connected. And we're also going to discuss, let's give a big shout out to Garland Nixon here. For those who are not aware, Garland Nixon actually just gave a speech at the UN. And I love when people get the opportunity to go to the UN and tell them about the atrocities that are happening across the world in reference to foreign policy. So let's go ahead and get into the thick of it. Shout out to Stay Blessed. Thank you so much for the super chat. Sabby, can I clone you? All I need is a single hair. Love your work. Oh, man. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you appreciate it. I'm laughing at the single hair part because it actually reminded me of a friend of mine one time, like when she went to New Orleans, she was talking about how in New Orleans, some people still practice voodoo. And I was like, and she was talking about the single strand of hair. I was like, what? That's why I'm laughing at your single hair comment. Okay. Let's go ahead and get into our first story. So Joe Biden actually recently had an interview with 60 Minutes. This has been making a lot of news because Joe Biden has not given as many interviews, and actually it's been pretty quiet on his side for quite some time. And I said before, I think they're trying to hide Joe Biden, obviously, because it's very clear that he's having difficulty communicating, right? So I feel like they're trying to keep him as quiet as much as possible. But what we want to focus on in this interview is in reference to Israel and Palestine. Now, I have 2 clips that I want to show. The first one is in reference to whether or not Joe Biden believes that Gaza will be occupied, that Israel will try to occupy Gaza, and whether or not he believes that is the right idea. Now, there has been a statement that was released from the state of Israel saying that they're not trying to occupy Gaza, but we've heard these things before, right? Listen to what Joe Biden says. I think you might be surprised by this.
Would you support Israeli occupation of Gaza at this point?
I think it'd be a big mistake. Look, what happened in Gaza, in my view, is Hamas and the extreme elements of Hamas don't represent all the Palestinian people.
Let's just pause there for a second. I was very surprised that this was the statement that he gave in reference to that particular question. And I have to tell you, and we'll go back through it, because I have to tell you this much. I honestly believe all of the protests that have happened all across the world, not just in the United States, and I'm going to show you what they look like in a second as well. I really do feel like that power on the outside, like the people in the streets, particularly a lot of the younger people that have been leading the way, I feel like that has kind of shifted things a bit. Not just the criticism that has come from people online. I'm talking about the movement of people in the streets that are willing to see this for what it really is. The people who are calling out the occupation, the people who are calling out a genocide. Those people have been very loud and very vocal. And like I said, this has been happening globally, not just in the United States. And I really do believe that before Joe Biden did this interview, he was already given a talking to about where he should stand in particular and how he should describe the Palestinian people. Because a lot of people, a lot of commentators over the past couple of weeks on mainstream media, they are referring to the Palestinians as Hamas, and they're not the same thing. There's one group that is Hamas, and then you have the Palestinian people. And I think it's really important that mainstream media try to correct that narrative. And they weren't doing that in the beginning. They were saying it as though they're all the same thing, and they're not all the same thing. That would be like someone who's not from the United States thinking that all of us are like the people who participated in the insurrection January 6th. Now, all Americans like that? Did all Americans participate in that? No, we did not. So we have to be careful how we try to paint these generalizations over a broad group of people based on the actions of few. I think that is very important. Let's continue, and then we'll go back, because I was actually surprised he said that.
And I think that it would be a mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza again. But to going in and taking out the extremists, the Hezbollah is up north, but Hamas down south is a necessary requirement.
Would you support?
So here's the problem with that part right there. He said going in and just taking out that particular group. That is not what's been happening. What's been happening is that there are attacks on, we just found out about this today. There was a hospital that was attacked. In the past, there have been schools that have been attacked. A number of civilian casualties that have happened. It's not like they're going in and seeking out just that particular group. They're doing like these large scale attacks, which obviously is going to cause civilian casualties. So when Joe Biden says that, we have to understand, again, that is not what is happening. Last time I checked the numbers, it was over 3,000 people in Palestine. Civilian casualties now, over 3,000. You have to remember there are 2 million people. We're 2 million people in Gaza. Over half of them are children. So this is something to keep in comparison. When people try to compare the casualties with Israel and Palestine, you have to remember every time there are always more casualties on the Palestinian side. Because who has the technology? Who has all the resources? The state of Israel does, not Palestine. But this part right here was particularly interesting.
Israeli occupation of Gaza at this point?
I think it'd be a big mistake. Look.
So he thinks it's a mistake for Israel to try to occupy Gaza. Now, why is that important? President Biden is actually planning to visit Israel, I believe sometime this week, from what I saw. But the reason that he's going there is to get them to convince Netanyahu to push the humanitarian aid through. So we have to remember, again, for those who are in Gaza that have not been a part of the casualties in reference to the war, right? They still have to deal with the fact that they're not getting food and they're not getting water and they don't have electricity. That includes electricity for hospitals as well. So in a sense, it's like if you are not a casualty of the war itself, you could still be a casualty because of starvation or because of dehydration. You can only go so long without water. You can only go so long without food. So that is why Biden is going there. He's not going there to say, hey, cut this out. He's going there to convince Netanyahu to allow them to push the humanitarian aid through to the people of Gaza so those people don't starve or they don't die from dehydration. And then he says this part.
What happened in Gaza, in my view, is Hamas and the extreme elements of Hamas don't represent all the Palestinian people.
And then that part right there. So I would imagine that, again, I think Joe Biden was giving a talking to before this interview and was told to say that because mainstream media has been using the narrative and it gets across to Americans that like all of the Palestinian people are that way. Now, where have we seen this before? I saw it after 9/11. For those of us who remember what happened after 9/11, there was this narrative that was spread across mainstream media to make people think that all people over there were like that all Iraqis were that way. And that's what people would think, right? So I would not be surprised if Joe Biden was not prepped before this interview to say, make sure you explain to people that there is a difference between Hamas and the Palestinian people, and not to refer to them as one thing. Now, I want to show you another part of this interview. There's a discussion that came up about whether or not the United States government at this point in time can afford to fund two wars. That's the war in Ukraine and the Israel and Palestine war. Remember, the United States government has been giving billions of dollars to Ukraine. Weapons, even a healthcare package was in one of those packages that they sent over there. Clean water was in one of those packages that were sent over there. They've been sending them billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine. And now the United States government has committed to also sending money and weapons to the state of Israel. So the question comes up, can the U.S. government afford to handle two conflicts of war at the same time? Listen to this.
Are the wars in Israel and Ukraine more than the United States can take on at the same time?
We're the United States of America, for God's sake. The most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world. The history of the world. We can take care of both of these and still maintain our overall international defense.
Okay. I had to play this because I just want to do a gotcha moment. If Joe Biden is admitting to you that the U.S. government can afford to take care of both of those conflicts at the same time in reference to aid, then that tells you that the U.S. government can afford to give everybody health care in this country. You see, he lets the cat out the bag when you tell people what the U.S. government can actually afford. And I'd push back on this because this is a little bit different. We're talking about sending weapons over there. Isn't it only an amount of time before the weapons that we have in the United States are depleted? Then what happens? Yes, of course, military contractors can create more weapons as they do. But is the president of the United States going to allow for the U.S. weapons to completely deplete? No. He's not going to allow for the U.S. government not to have any weapons left at all, which means at some point or another, he's going to either have to say no to Zelensky or Netanyahu. Now, Zelensky's already crying and feeling like he's not getting enough attention because this conflict is now happening. And you guys know how I feel about this particular issue. The United States government should not be the world's bank. The U.S. government shouldn't be the world's police. The U.S. government should not be involved in these conflicts abroad. But here we are. Now, we got ourselves into this mess, not you and I personally, but our government got ourselves into this mess. Now, if the U.S. government doesn't fulfill or has to back off for financial reasons, it's only a matter of time before Zelensky is mad at us. Or Netanyahu is mad at us. This is what happens when you intervene. Let me let him continue.
We have the capacity to do this, and we have an obligation to. We are the essential nation, as to paraphrase the former Secretary of State. And if we don't,
I don't even know what that meant. I don't even know what this meant. What he said here.
Overall international defense. We have the capacity to do this, and we have an obligation to. We are the essential nation, as to paraphrase the former Secretary of State.
We are the what? We are the former nation to what? Secretary of State? What does that even mean?
And if we don't, who does?
Are the wars?
That's not our problem. That part right there, if we don't, who does? Why are we worried about what other people are doing? There is a split, though. There is a little rift that's happening now. I'm going to show you what Janet Yellen said in reference to whether or not America can afford another war. And then I'm going to give you my opinion about the way that this is even being discussed on these news outlets, which is something that I think is the elephant in the room that is not a part of the discussion. And I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be able to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it. But let's get into what Janet Yellen says about whether or not we can afford another war.
What this all means. Paul Tudor Jones, the famed investor, was on CNBC this week, and he said, "This is the most threatening and challenging geopolitical environment that I've ever seen. At the same time, the US is in its weakest fiscal position since World War II, with debt to GDP at 122%. Can America, can the West afford another war at this time?"
I think the answer is absolutely. America can certainly afford to stand with Israel and to support Israel's military needs.
You got to know who this is. So this is Janet Yellen. She's another war hawk. So of course she's going to say that, right? Oh, absolutely. We can afford to do both. War hawks. What is the question that they should ask? When you look at the 60 Minutes interview and you look at this interview on the Sky News, instead of asking, or if you're going to ask that question, can the US government afford two wars at the same time monetarily? Shouldn't you actually ask, why do we have two wars under this president? Why is the US government involved in two international conflicts under this president? Two international conflicts that started under this president. Now we can go back and we can say like when this conflict started with Israel and Palestine, really started back 1970s. We can get into all that. But the actual war started under Joe Biden. The Russia-Ukraine war started under Joe Biden. So I think the question that these commentators should ask is, why did this president in particular get us into two wars at the same time? Maybe at the same time, but under his presidency. How did he allow two wars under his presidency? And I hope everybody remembers this when it's time to vote in 2024. Two. Not a fan of Donald Trump at all. Donald Trump also sent aid to Ukraine. Also participated in drone strikes. But the point that a lot of people make is that he didn't start any new wars. We have two under Joe Biden. Warhawk.
And we also can and must support Ukraine in its struggle against Russia. And look, the American economy is doing extremely well.
That is not true. So you see how they just tell these lies. The American economy is doing extremely well. Is that what you guys see? Grocery store prices are still high. We talked about the economy. We've talked about this for a long time. The homelessness crisis in this country has increased by 25%. 10 communities all across the country. But the economy is doing really well, according to Janet Yellen. But see, they all have to tell this lie. They all have to tell this lie because if they get on there and they say the economy is not doing well, then that's not good for Joe Biden. My comrade Nick from RBN had something to say about Janet Yellen. This is really good. I think Nick nailed it on this.
Janet Yellen, the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, just recently said the U.S. economy is doing so well that we can fund wars in Palestine and in Ukraine. So as Bidenomics continue to fail in the eyes of the American people, instead of addressing those concerns, the Biden administration is pushing for funding endless war. Last year, Janet Yellen was nominated as one of the Times People of the Year. Liberals loved her and praised her because she was the first female Secretary of Treasury. Doesn't it just warm your heart that we finally have a female in charge that is calling for funding endless war? This is what progress looks like. There is not enough conversation about how absolutely unhinged the Biden administration cabinet is. The Biden administration cabinet is filled with swamp monsters like this liberal girl boss, Janet Yellen, Lloyd Austin, and Anthony Blinken. This is even more concerning since we know Biden is a brain-dead, demented puppet. So essentially the executive branch is controlled by a bunch of psychopaths.
And the point that Nick is addressing here, this whole idea of we have a first female this, or we have the first African-American person in this position ever. People focus on just the identity part, that they don't pay attention to what that person is actually doing while they're in that position. Janet Yellen is just another war hog, right? So when there is that stress and that expression about their identity, it's easier for people to ignore how they're actually doing their job. Interesting times, folks.
In fact, Biden's cabinet was essentially selected by WestExec, an organization that represents corporations and help rehabilitate war criminals. The goal of the Democratic Party and the neoliberal agenda is to create a police state in the United States, building cop cities and supermax prisons while funding never-ending wars. This is the liberal focus as millions of people don't have health care, millions of people are homeless, and millions of people are food insecure. We are living through an era of late-stage capitalism and the decline of the empire. And like previous empires, the United States is ignoring their own people so they can wage endless war.
That's what it's about. All of the needs that Americans have in this country, not paying attention to us, instead paying attention to, what's happening abroad. They can easily decrease that defense budget, which is over $860 billion. And they could fund a lot of these issues that we have in this country, but they don't want to. Because again, like I said, they feel like that's not profitable, but it actually could be profitable, because when you take care of your people and the people are doing well, they're getting the jobs, they're able to feed their families, they're able to, actually have a future. If we look at the Gen Z group, they're actually able to have a future. They're able to buy a house. They're able to get married. They're able to start families. That in turn is invested back into the economy. When we do well, the economy does well. We're not doing so well right now. Not doing so well. Now, there is a split, whether it's the Democrat side or the Republican side. There's the split in reference to how much the U.S. should participate in reference to the Israel and Palestine conflict. Should the U.S. be involved at all? There's a split on the Republican side between people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis. And there's a split on the Democrat side between people like Joe Biden and people like Rashida Tlaib. We're going to get to her in a second. She's speaking out against this as well. So there is a split in both parties in reference to whether or not the U.S. should actually get involved in this conflict. And if so, if they should take a side or not. Vivek Ramaswamy recently was on Louder with Crowder, who I'm not a fan of this guy either. But Vivek Ramaswamy was asked about the conflict with Israel and Palestine in reference to if the United States government should get involved. Now, I've seen him flip-flop on this because at one point in the interview, I heard him say that, well, yes, we should support the state of Israel. But in this interview, he's saying something a little bit different. Listen to this.
Talked about this, obviously, in the last couple of weeks, or the last week or so, with Israel Hamas.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between Ukraine and Russia.
Big difference.
In that Hamas is a terrorist organization where the extermination of all Jews is in their charter. And I don't necessarily think
Israel matters to our national interest more than Ukraine does.
Yeah, sure. They do. As a matter of fact, they...
Pause. I hope you caught what Vivek Ramaswamy just said there. He said Israel matters more to our national interests than Ukraine does. Remember that video I played a couple of nights ago? It was Joe Biden giving a speech back when he was a senator, and he said if there wasn't an Israel, the U.S. government would create one. This is really how this works. The U.S. government is going to back those that help its national interest. Let's continue.
Certainly do matter to our national interest. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't an argument to be made, and we ran the numbers. If we cut the funding to all of the nations with who we provide foreign aid to, and by the way, those numbers are always a very low estimate when you actually understand also the incentives, and Israel as well, that they would come out ahead because we fund a bunch of people who want to wipe them off the face of the map, or help Israel a little bit and cut money anyways to places like Iran.
The analogy you're drawing is an interesting one. Elon has drawn this analogy with respect to electric vehicle subsidies, where if you got rid of all electric vehicle subsidies, Tesla comes out ahead because the unit economics actually work.
Well, that's because they've sold too many Teslas. That's why they don't get the subsidy anymore. I think it's after 250,000 sold, the subsidy goes away. So it's like, oh, so I sold good cars.
And the unit economics are just more solid in terms of how they're running the operation. So here's what I would say. I think that this is a moment right now, when we're having this conversation now, where we need rational, cool-headed responses to ask, yes, how do we support Israel's own right to its own national self-defense, as Israel is fully entitled to? Yeah. What happened, what Hamas did was barbaric. It was wrong. It was inhumane. It was medieval in its nature.
Mm-hmm.
Let me pause here for a second. You notice something that they do? Notice when they do say that Israel has a right to defend itself, you never hear them say that the Palestinians have a right to defend their self. Notice you never hear them say that. A lot of these people, even the ones like Vivek, who claims like the U.S. shouldn't be spending their money in foreign interest abroad, they're only willing to go so far if you pay attention. Because even Vivek is willing to tell you that Israel has a right to defend itself. He's not going to go far enough and say, and the Palestinian people have a right to defend their self. He's not going to go that far. So pay attention to that.
Israel absolutely has the right to national self-existence and to fully defend itself. That's a decision for Israel as to how they go about doing it. And our job is diplomatically, in terms of intelligence sharing, in terms of limited circumstances of munition support. That is our job as a partner and ally at the UN. Tell the UN you're not going to draw some false equivalence between Israel's defense.
Ceasefire.
Yeah, exactly. All that nonsense.
Let's pause here for a second. You notice what else I've noticed? They're also willing to point out that Hamas, calling them barbaric and savage and things like that. But they're never willing to do the same about the crimes and the atrocities that have been committed by the state of Israel to the Palestinian people in places like Gaza and the West Bank. I want to be very clear for people who are new to the show. When I'm talking about the state of Israel, I'm talking about the Israeli government. I'm not talking about Jewish people. So this is something that I think that people need to pay attention to. They're never willing to call that out. They're never willing to mention what's been happening to the Palestinian people over the past decades, starting back all the way back in the 1970s. They're never willing to talk about the fact how these people were dragged out of their home. They had guns pointed to their face. Their homes were taken over, and then they were pushed into a small section and told, this is only where you can live. We are going to fence you in. Oh, and by the way, we're going to call this fence a border, which, by the way, a fence is not a border. Gaza is not a separate country. They never bring that up. Let's continue.
Nonsense.
Oh, it's the most ridiculous thing.
It's the most ridiculous
thing. Hey, I was just raped, though. Yeah, but now it's a ceasefire.
Ceasefire, exactly. Yeah. Selective timing of this.
I'm still
so our job is diplomatically to stand against all that nonsense. But I don't want to be one of these people shrieking. I mean, Nikki Haley was screeching on air, finish them, with a vague reference to almost Iran was what she invoked right before she said that. And then you talk about Mike Pence, just do it. It's like a Nike. Finish them is from like Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just do it is like a Nike slogan. So they're like misappropriating corporate slogans as though that's our foreign. Lindsey Graham, he said something equivalent to this.
Now, to be fair, I did say kill every.
Did you hear what he almost said? I wish he would have finished that because I want to add something to that piece when he's talking about the slogans.
Single line is rehearsed, and then you can see sometimes where he looks out like a kid who just told a joke, but it's inappropriate because it's in front of adults. Like, this joke didn't land, man. I just wish that people would be more authentic. Well, can we delineate though? And we've talked about this obviously in the last couple of weeks, the last week or so, with Israel Hamas.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between Ukraine and Russia.
Big difference.
In that Hamas is a terrorist organization where the extermination
Went back too far. Sorry. Here we go.
ceasefire.
Yeah, exactly. All that nonsense.
Oh, it's the most ridiculous thing.
It's the most ridiculous.
Hey, ceasefire. I was just raped though. Yeah, but now it's a ceasefire.
Ceasefire. Exactly.
Yeah.
Selective timing of this.
I'm so sore.
Our job is diplomatically to stand against all that nonsense. But I don't want to be one of these people shrieking. I mean, Nikki Haley was screeching on air, finish them, with a vague reference to almost Iran was what she invoked right before she said that. And then you talk about Mike Pence, just do it. It's like a Nike. Finish them is from like Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just do it is like a Nike slogan. So they're like misappropriating corporate slogans as though that's our foreign. But Lindsey Graham, what?
That part right there. When he says misappropriating corporate slogans as though that's our foreign policy. But in a way, corporations are involved. Ask yourself why BlackRock is investing in Ukraine. That's something to think about. He didn't finish it. He didn't finish what he was saying, but corporations are involved in our foreign policy.
He said something equivalent to this.
Now, to be fair, I did say kill every last one of Hamas. Absolutely. Every last member of Hamas.
And that's Israel's decision to make.
Right.
And so Israel's making those decisions. I trust them to do the right thing. But we have to be.
Why does he trust them to do the right thing? Because he was told to? It's interesting to me that it's gotten to the point that even he's Republican, but even the Democrat politicians, now all of a sudden the extreme right wing is not of a concern. The same Democrat politicians that tell you we have to get rid of the extreme crazy right wing presence in the United States. Those same politicians like a Hakeem Jeffries and a Richie Torres have no problem siding and agreeing with extreme right-wing Netanyahu. No problem. They have no problem. Jamal Bowman as well. This is why I continue to tell you both parties are corporate, both parties are corrupt. When it comes to certain things, they are bipartisan. When it comes to the military-industrial complex, they're bipartisan. When it comes to war, they're bipartisan. When it comes to corporate interests, they're bipartisan. The only time they seem to be not bipartisan and working together is when it comes to the people. And even when it comes to the American people, the Democratic Party will give us a little bit of things. They'll give us crumbs. But they're not going to actually make changes to our lives, make changes in this country that's actually going to impact and benefit American people. They're not going to give everybody health care, for example. But when it comes to war, both parties are on board. When it comes to corporate interests, both parties are on board. And even when it comes to this right-wing extremism abroad, seems like to me, both parties seem to be on board.
Very careful not to sleepwalk or emotionally outburst ourselves into another broad regional conflict that in the Middle East that the U.S. is enmeshed in with ground troops or otherwise. This is when we've made our worst foreign policy disastrous mistakes in the past. So if I'm talking to Bibi, I would say, listen up, we got your back. Mm-hmm. You're on the right side of this. Don't let anybody stand in your way from defending yourself, and we've got your back on that. But my advice to you.
You see it? We got your back. We got your back. All the things that you've done to the Palestinian people, don't worry, we got your back. And what's really interesting is, and this is why I continue to say Vivek Ramaswamy is a freaking fraud, is what's really interesting about this, a lot of the Islamophobia that's happening in the country right now that I told you I've seen before, after September 11, it has returned. Given what's happening with Israel and Palestine, we'll show you a story that happened, something that happened to a 6-year-old little boy in a minute. You have to remember, and I want to be very clear, Vivek Ramaswamy is not Christian. when he does his speeches, he always say, we got to worry about country and God, but he don't tell you which God. And people can have whatever religion they want, as far as I'm concerned. But the party that Vivek Ramaswamy is running in is not on board with his religion. But Vivek Ramaswamy's okay here to condemn the. Let's go on.
Would be that we've made some of our poorest decisions in the wake of real disaster. That was your 9/11. We had our 9/11 here. And we entered disastrous multi-decade commitments in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And 20 years later, it did not do us an iota of good.
There's a little bit of a difference, so I will say.
And so just be careful.
Yeah, be careful. Say. But if you're comparing it as a percentage of the population, I think it would roughly
36 times, what it was.
Yeah, 20 to 30 thousand Americans. And they live right there, and it's never, But
here's all I would say is, though, let's say, as awful as this would have been, as 30 times as many people died on 9/11 as they did.
And Canada did it.
Well, going to Iraq still has nothing to do with that. Right. So I'm just making the point that we've made some of our worst decisions in response to emotional reactions to really, truly disastrous things that needed to be dealt with.
Right.
Targeted response, get rid of bin Laden, get rid of the Taliban. Absolutely. Get rid of Al Qaeda hiding in the caves, the people who were responsible for this, which, by the way, was a far more complicated story than the U.S. government let out until the declassified files came out 20 years later. Sure. Go actually get the real job done rather than using an emotional response to do something that literally might be an orthogonal objective, but in the mental haze and in the mental fog of war, we've made some of our worst decisions, so have other countries in their history. That's Israel's decision to make, but my job as the next U.S. president is to look after American interests. And I do not think we want to be entrenched in another long, drawn-out, U.S.-involved regional broad conflict in the Middle East that would not advance American interests. But there are easy ways we ought to support Israel diplomatically with intelligence sharing.
Let me pause there for a second. So you see what he's doing? So what he's telling you is that he really does not believe that the U.S. should be involved in another drawn-out war, right? He continues to say that Israel should have that response, that he trusts that the decisions that Israel is going to make. He doesn't really believe that the U.S. should be involved. But at the same time, he'll tell you that he supports Israel. And so there does seem to be this divide. Like I said, there was a conversation, I think I'll cover this maybe Thursday. There was a conversation in reference to Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson. They are split on this issue. Tucker Carlson does not think the U.S. should be involved. Of course, Ben Shapiro does think the U.S. Should be involved. But notice what they do. He'll pivot back to, I'm concerned about the interest right here in the U.S. and the American people. That's kind of a way for him to not say which side he would take or what he would do as president. But I got news for you, Vivek. If you're president of the United States, foreign policy is a part of that job. Part of that is commander in chief. That is part of your role. So if you are president, you can't just say, yeah, I don't know, I'm just going to take care of American interests. You are going to have to make a decision in reference to a conflict of Israel and Palestine, in reference to Russia and Ukraine. This is just a fact. That is part of the job. So it's like he's trying to walk in the middle a little bit. Let me let him finish and then we'll go to the next clip.
I mean, heck, we don't even have an ambassador to Israel right now. Confirm an ambassador to Israel and Egypt and other countries where we don't have confirmed ambassadors right now.
We start with no money to Iran at all.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And no money to Hamas.
Yeah. $6 billion. Yes, exactly.
I mean, there's been, but even indirect aid to Hamas that's actually been going through in the name of humanitarian aid or otherwise.
Yeah, right.
Deport anybody in this country who has had any ties to Hamas or otherwise, extradite them to Israel. So there are things we ought to absolutely be doing. I know. But there's also things that nobody else is talking about that we ought to be talking about. We have to make sure that we oversee full phase out through the monitoring and agreements of Iran's nuclear program. But what the heck are we thinking with the Biden administration, with some Republicans cheering it along, talking about nuclear technology transfer to Saudi Arabia?
Yeah.
We should not want nuclear proliferation of any kind in the Middle East, and definitely not in Iran, but not in Saudi Arabia either. And yet nobody's talking
of any kind. So that means that no one should have it. Because when you say of any kind, I'm thinking no one should have it. That includes the United States. That includes China. That includes Russia. That includes every country when you say no one.
Talking about that right now. So I think this is a moment for level-headed rationality rather than emotional knee-jerk responses. And now it's a cool thing, right? It's what the cool kids do, criticize the Iraq War 20 years ago in either party. It's the cool, easy thing to do because it's long past and there's no consequence to you to do it. I'm not patting myself on the back. I was in college at the time, but I was against the Iraq War then. I had a bunch of other harebrained ideas that I was dead wrong on, but that wasn't one of them. Yeah. And that was a left-wing position then, even though I wasn't on the left. I consider myself a libertarian back then. But now it's easy to do that now. But the hard part is in the thick and the heat of the moment to make sure you don't make that same mistake, but it's not going to relate to Iraq. It might relate to Iran or a broad.
We'll go ahead and pause it there. It's really interesting because I showed a video when he was in college where he was at Al Sharpton's event at Harvard University. He was there also with Pete Buttigieg. They just happened to be at the same Al Sharpton event when he was running for president, and both of them were actually selected as speakers to come forward and ask a question. Interesting how that works, right? Yeah, but he says he was a libertarian. Now, it gets deeper because other countries are coming out against Israel's decisions. And one of those countries, and this one really threw me for a loop, and that was Spain. This is new. Spain has come forward and said, today we raise our voice to denounce that Israel was carrying out a genocide in Gaza. We ask the government of Spain to bring Netanyahu before the International Criminal Court for war crimes. We're just going to play just a little of this. Again, this is Spain.
Buenos días, bon día, egunon, vos días. Me dirijo a todas vosotras y vosotros con el corazón.
I address all of you with a heavy heart by the image. I think they mean images. Images coming from Palestine.
Son absolutamente encogido por las imágenes que nos llegan desde Palestina. Desde Podemos no somos indiferentes al atroz sufrimiento que el pueblo palestino lleva viviendo durante décadas.
So they are not indifferent to the suffering that Palestinians have been experiencing for decades.
Hoy queremos alzar nuestra voz para denunciar que el Estado de Israel está llevando a cabo un genocidio planificado en la franja.
Okay, so they said that they condemn what the state of Israel is doing, carrying out a genocide among the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, leaving hundreds of thousands of people without light, food, and water, and carrying out bombings.
De Gaza, dejando sin luz, sin comida y sin agua a cientos de miles de personas y llevando a cabo bombardeos sobre población civil que son un castigo colectivo, incumplen gravemente el derecho internacional.
Says on the civilian population that our collective punishment seriously breach international law.
Y pueden considerarse crímenes de guerra. Ante esto, Estados Unidos y la Unión Europea no es solo que miren hacia otro lado.
She calls them war crimes, and she goes on to say that the U.S. and the European Union, that the EU, they cannot be neutral on this.
Es que están jaleando al Estado de Israel en su política de apartheid y de ocupación.
She says that they are encouraging the state of Israel in reference to apartheid.
Que vulnera gravemente los derechos humanos. Usar los terribles asesinatos de civiles israelíes por parte de las facciones armadas palestinas como excusa para justificar los crímenes de Israel en general y la
They are using it as an excuse to justify Israel's crimes in general, and the massacre in Gaza in particular is unacceptable.
masacre en Gaza en particular es algo absolutamente inaceptable. El Estado de Israel, su primer ministro y su partido han reconocido en numerosas ocasiones que promocionaron a Hamás para debilitar a los sectores laicos de la.
It says that Israel and also Netanyahu, they have acknowledged that on occasions that they promoted Hamas to weaken the secular sectors of the Palestinian resistance. This is the piece I think that a lot of people are missing, is that it's not like Hamas just came out of nowhere. It was promoted by the state of Israel. And we have to continue to stress that to people, because I think a lot of people are not aware of that, especially if they're just watching mainstream media. It didn't come out of nowhere. It was created, it was promoted for a reason by the state of Israel. Now, I want to see Anderson Cooper say that.
La resistencia palestina. Usar a Hamás como una excusa para asesinar millares de civiles palestinos y
And we'll finish here because this is a long video, but Using Hamas as an excuse to murder thousands of Palestinian civilians, including children, is unspeakable. Again, that is coming from Spain. So Spain is not with it. With that, they said, no, we are actually condemning what the state of Israel is doing. And then we also have Colombia. Colombia condemns genocide in Gaza, threatens to sever ties with Israel. And this brings me to another question. Are we going to see another shift in reference to diplomatic relations with countries across the world? We see Spain is speaking up. We see Colombia is speaking up. You know, is it possible that a country like Spain, for example, may say, you know what, we're not down with this? What if Spain left the EU? These are things to think about. Some of these other countries, BRICS is taking applications. Goes on to say here, I'll just read a little bit. There's Gustavo. Says Petro denounced the genocide carried out by the Israeli occupation aircraft in Gaza, demanding that the protection of health sector workers. He went on to stress that systematic attacks on civilians and genocide must be stopped and international law adhered to. The basic needs of life must be protected in Gaza, he added, announcing that Colombia would send humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. The Israeli occupation foreign minister responded saying Israel decided to stop security exports to Colombia. According to Israeli media, Tel Aviv summoned its Colombian ambassador in protest against Petro's statements. So he responded and said, if we have to suspend foreign relations with Israel, we will suspend them. We do not support genocides. The president of Colombia will not be insulted. So Colombia clapped back. Now, today, there was a hospital attacked in Gaza. Now, Rashida Tlaib tweeted this. Israel just bombed the Baptist hospital, killing 500 Palestinians, doctors, children, patients, just like that. POTUS, this is what happens when you refuse to facilitate a ceasefire and help de-escalate. Your war and destruction only approach has opened my eyes and many Palestinian Americans and Muslim Americans like me. We will remember where you stood. And so I just want to say this, Rashida Tlaib, are you willing to take back your endorsement of Joe Biden? Because otherwise this means nothing. Because if you're not willing to take back your public endorsement of Joe Biden, this statement here doesn't mean anything. Just keeping it real. Now, there have been many different stories about this. Israel said that they weren't the ones that actually attacked the hospital. They're saying that Hamas actually attacked the hospital by a misfire, but there have been multiple, media networks that have said different things. A lot of people don't really know. I know the Gray Zone actually covered this earlier today. They were interviewing a Palestinian gentleman who was talking about this. They're saying that technically, based on the technology and the disaster that came from it, that you can tell that it actually came from Israel. In fact, Eric, I didn't send you this, but I'm about to pull this up real quick because this video came through and I do want to make sure I show this. It's from another news outlet and they're going to tell you how they know that it actually came from Israel. Hold on, let me put it up here for a second. Okay, there he is. Listen to this. Because there's been a lot of lies that have been told since this all started. It says BBC journalist says the attack on the Al Ali National Baptist Hospital in Gaza had to be done by Israel. Listen to what he says for his reasoning.
The Israeli military has been contacted for comment, and they have said that they are investigating. But, it is hard to see what else this could be, really, given the size of the explosion, other than an Israeli airstrike or several airstrikes. Because, when we've seen rockets being fired out of Gaza, we never see explosions of that scale. We might see half a dozen, maybe a few more people being killed in such rocket attacks. But we've never seen anything on the scale of the sort of explosion on the video I was watching earlier, which, as you say, is still to be verified. The Israeli military has.
Okay, I wanted to play that for a reason. Remember, when we talk about resources, who has more advanced technology, even when it comes to the weapons? Israel does. So what they were saying on the BBC is that because of the scale of the attack, the scale of the explosion, they're saying there's no way that that could have come from Hamas. So you see, different media outlets are saying different things, but it's very obvious what's happening here. It's very obvious. You know that our politicians, a lot of them are in bed. Pull this up. A lot of our politicians are in bed with the Israeli lobby. We've talked about this before on the show. A lot of them are supported or endorsed by AIPAC. We talked about how AIPAC has actually come together to push out certain voices that don't 100% go against the Palestinian people. Even if you say that both people deserve to have the same rights, they still will come out and attack you and smear you and put up money to make sure that you're not reelected or elected in the first damn place. So we know what's happening here. There is a narrative that is being controlled. And had it not been for independent media, and had it not been for the people, the thousands of people who came out in the streets across this country and across the world, they would still be telling that narrative. Think about it. Think about how it's always from one side. It is the independent journalists that are going into Gaza and reporting. Anderson Cooper is standing on top of a balcony in Tel Aviv. I don't see Anderson Cooper putting on a helmet and going in Gaza. None of them. Now, I want to go ahead and transition into what this is causing to happen. I told you earlier, again, at the beginning of the story, I'm starting to see another rise in Islamophobia. And I also want to say, first and foremost, not everyone that's Palestinian is Muslim, but even if they were, so what? There are Palestinians in Palestine that are Christian, that are Jewish. Not all of them are Muslim. But this type of hateful rhetoric has been going on for a long time. Now, I want to start with this statement that came from Ben Shapiro. And then we're going to go ahead and move to the story about the 6-year-old little boy. And I'm going to tell you how this spreads. So this is when Ben Shapiro was on the BBC and he was called out for his statements about Palestinians. Listen to this.
I've been trying to point out some of the things you've said that seem to me to help to stoke that anger. For example, you said Israelis like to build, Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage.
Well, as I say in an article entitled, here's a list of all the giant, bad, dumb things I've ever said.
Was that dumb?
What? Yes, that's a dumb tweet. And not only, but it is also important to mention that the next few tweets clarify that that tweet is specifically referring to the Hamas leadership, which, by the way, a BBC I've seen is relatively reticent to condemn.
No, actually, it wasn't what you went on to do and say. You are correct about the slur on Arabs. It's not all Arabs that want to live in open sewage and blow things up. It's just Palestinians. You went on to say.
You hear that? These things happened. See, people tweet things and they forgot what they tweeted. These things happened. This type of rhetoric is why people, particularly Americans, have the belief that they do about people.
Blow things up. It's just Palestinians. You went on to say.
It's just the ones who take sides against Israel in the Israel-Palestinian conflict.
Population is rotten to the core. You went on to say, not Hamas, the Palestinian Arab population.
So this is a part of the problem, is that people are starting to, when they talk about Hamas, they make it sound like that's all of the Palestinians, that they're all that's one group, right? Just like you've had radical groups in the United States in reference to religion. And now this can bring up a whole nother discussion about religion and whether it's more harmful or helpful. We can get into all of that. Right? There have been many wars that have happened over religion, but there are different groups, right? So you have people that are Christians, and yes, there were some Christians that will go to abortion clinics and what will they do? They'll bomb the abortion clinics, right? Does that represent all Christians? No, it doesn't. What Ben Shapiro did there is he got busted was that he tried to basically make it seem like all of Palestine was Hamas. He smeared those people. And that type of rhetoric, that type of hateful rhetoric leads to things like this. If you have not heard about this story, 6-year-old Muslim boy killed by the landlord. Listen to why. Listen to this.
Now to new warnings of potential threats here in the United States and growing fears that the war abroad could lead to trouble here at home after a horrific attack in Illinois that left a 6-year-old little boy dead. Our Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas is in Washington with that. Good morning, Pierre.
Lindsay, good morning. I want to warn you and our friends at home that what I'm about to tell you is incredibly heart-wrenching. It's fresh evidence that the FBI is right to fear that the carnage from the Israeli-Hamas war could spill over here at home. We learned that a 71-year-old landlord in a Chicago suburb viciously attacked 2 of his renters, fatally stabbing a 6-year-old boy and wounding his mother, simply because they were Muslim and apparently because of his pure hatred about what's happening in Israel. Police say he stabbed.
You hear that? You see what's happening, people? By the way, this is it. I saw this after September 11th. This is what happened. So to those of you who are commentators on mainstream media, you got an important job to do. When you tell these stories, the way you frame these stories, the narrative that's given to you by producers. Now you can do the right damn thing. And you can talk about what's happening to the Palestinian people too, not just what's happening to the state of Israel. And yeah, you may lose your job for it, but at least you'll have your morality and some type of ethics. Or you can continue to sit there and be a paid shill and have no integrity and just collect checks, which is what a lot of them are doing. And I'll say it again, had it not been for the mass movements that happened across the world, they wouldn't be coming back to retract some of the statements that they put out. And I'm going to show you a retraction in a second.
Stabbed that little boy with Dia al-Fayoum 26 times with a military-style knife. Attorney General Merrick Garland said late last night he was, quote, heartbroken and announced a federal hate crimes investigation. The FBI says the most immediate concern is that so-called lone wolves and other unstable individuals inflamed by the Israeli conflict will act out and harm whoever's near. I was in a telephone briefing with the FBI director and a couple of senior FBI officials yesterday, and Christopher Wray warned that he cannot discount the possibility that Hamas and other terrorist organizations could call on supporters to attack here at home. Serious times, guys.
Everybody see what's happening? That little boy, 6 years old, he was stabbed 26 times. 6 years old. Now, mainstream media, I'm looking at you because since day one, you've been smearing people, you've been smearing activists, you've been smearing protesters. Here comes the BBC having to make a retraction. Little too late, though, because they were smearing protesters as well.
Now, before we go, earlier on BBC News, we reported on some of the pro-Palestinian demonstrations at the weekend. We spoke about several demonstrations across Britain during which people voiced their backing for Hamas. We accept that this was poorly phrased and was a misleading description of the pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Now, here's the weather. Now, before we go, earlier on BBC News, we reported on some of the pro-Palestinian demonstrations at the weekend. We spoke about several demonstrations across Britain during which people voiced their backing for Hamas. We accept that this was poorly phrased and was a misleading description of the.
So I just want to say something really quick. That was another example of them basically saying anything that's pro-Palestinian means that you're supporting Hamas. That was just another example of that. Then she has the nerve to say at the end, now here's the weather. CNN journalist came forward and had to retract her statement. This is a mess. And then people wonder why. No one trusts mainstream media anymore. You guys are liars. A lot of these people sitting at these desks, they say they're commentators. Oh, I'm a journalist. I've listened to Anderson Cooper. I'm going to go off about him. I listened to Anderson Cooper for years say, oh, I'm a journalist, investigative journalist, and I da-da-da. You're not no damn journalist, Anderson Cooper. You read the teleprompter in front of you. You're not out here in the field, in these streets, getting stories from people. You read the script that they give you. You don't research a damn thing. They kill me with this. Oh, journalists, so-and-so. These people are not journalists. And the real journalists, the ones who are in the thick of it, the ones who have gone to Gaza, you'll never see those people on those outlets. You'll never see them invite them on CNN or MSNBC. Some of them may get invited on Fox News, but that's only when the president is a Democrat, for the most part. But the real journalists, most Americans don't even know about. But here's the weather.
Pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Now, here's the weather. Now, before
it's too late because the damage was already done. Already done. But that didn't stop people from showing solidarity. Harvard University students, after several of them being attacked because of the letter that students put out to express their appreciation for Palestine, that didn't stop them from protesting on the Harvard steps. These kids aren't dumb. I got to tell you, the younger kids, particularly those, I'd say college age, they are much further along than where I was when I was in undergrad. They have caught on to these things. Now, granted, we didn't have social media when I was in undergrad, but they're very much awake. They know what's going on. They know what's happening to the Palestinian people. And when we look at the protests happening globally, I want to show you what that looked like. When I said globally, it's globally. Now, shout out to Alan, because Alan's been keeping track of all this. Here's Spain. That's Spain. A lot of people, right? He has so many more. Amsterdam. Look at all those people. The people know. The people know. They're not stupid. They know what's happening. There's more. London. So even in the UK, people know what's up. Look at all the people.
No civilized nation on earth would agree that depriving children of food and water is acceptable. I'm here because I'm a human being, and anyone with a conscience believes that a civilian population should never be punished in this way. It's collective punishment. It's a war crime. And unless we stop it, unless we get out there and say something, it's going to end up with thousands losing their lives.
Can you put into words how you feel about the loss of life on both sides?
Every life is precious. But the root of this violence is the occupation. It's not complicated.
That part right there is very important for people to hear. It's not complicated. I get so tired of people telling me that, well, you don't understand, it's complicated. No, it's not complicated. It's really not. France, even though Macron has threatened to make this criminal, you know that doesn't stop the French from coming up and showing out. You know that does not stop them from showing out. So that's France. Lots of people, right? And I believe we got one more. We have Ireland. See, people know, man. They understand what's happening to those people. That's Dublin. Awesome, right? All over the world. And I just actually featured the rally that was in Boston. I did find out the head count after I recorded that yesterday. So if you haven't had a chance to watch the Boston rally, check that out. That it premiered earlier this afternoon on my show. But the head count, they said the final head count was 5,000 people. And I believe it because it was a lot of people in these streets. But we got to stand up to this, man. We got to stand up to this. And we'll say this again, because I think some people confused. There is a difference between the state of Israel and Jewish people and Zionism. Not everyone that's Jewish is a Zionist. In fact, everyone that I know that is Jewish is not. Not everyone that is a Zionist is Jewish. Paging RFK Jr. Let's go to some of the comments here. Thank you for the super chat, P. Smith. If lying was an Olympic sport. Thank you, Stan. Your Israeli/Hamas coverage is award worthy. You have re-educated me from the miseducation I received. Thank you. Thank you, Stan. Thank you. Thank you, Christian, for the $2. Christian sends love. Dionysus says, yes, thank you, Spaniards. Thank you, Nambians, for the super chat. Dr. King once said, nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Our corrupt politicians engage in conscientious stupidity so that they can keep the populace sincerely ignorant. That's right. Well said. Thank you. Stay blessed. This was a slave revolt. Now Massa can whip the Palestinians more cruelly. Thank you, DC. Thou shalt not kill. Forget about it. And I want to say something else, too, that I think people also need to understand. When people have told me, and Afeni and I talked about this on the show, and people told me like, oh, Black people, this is not, like, no, we should not get involved in this. This is not our thing. Nah. Oppressed people is a problem, period. So I come from a group that was oppressed, still is oppressed. When we look at some of the things that's happened to the Palestinian people, those are the same things that happened to African Americans in this country. So don't come to tell me who I should stand for. When I look at our revolutionary leaders, they stood with Palestine. Malcolm X, Nelson Mandela, Kwame Ture. They all went to Palestine. There's a statue, and we talked about this with Afeni. There's a statue of Nelson Mandela in Palestine for good reason. Nelson Mandela spent over 20 years in jail fighting against apartheid in South Africa. And it is alarming to me that people can't make the connection between what's happening between Israel and Palestine. Who has the resources? Who has the power? Who's being oppressed? It's not complicated. I'll take the comment on Rockfin. Eric, thank you. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Why is Congress quick to cut the check and president with the pen to sign to prop up military campaigns abroad for people who never attacked us? Yet no single payer, government jobs guarantee, permanent housing for our homeless, paychecks still under H2O, speculation running wild with the Fed chair Powell, who said he is raising interest rates to cause pain to the worker economy to place leverage back in the hands of the boss class. Sabs, U.S. weapons stockpile is already depleted. Concern is growing with the Pentagon over the potential need to stretch its increasingly scarce ammunition stockpiles to support Ukraine and Israel in two separate wars. According to multiple U.S. defense officials, if Israel launches a ground incursion into Gaza, The Israeli military will create a new and entirely unexpected demand for 155 million or 155 mm. Oh, okay, I see. I didn't realize that was connected. 155 mm artillery, ammunition, and other weapons at a time when the U.S. and its allies and partners have been stretched thin from more than 18 months of fighting in Ukraine. From CNN link below, feel free to put in the chat. So if we're going to play this game, then should all blacks assume all whites are KKK or KKK affiliated? Exactly. Thank you for that, Roger. Exactly. A hot mess. Oh, I didn't see these. I'm sorry, guys. Thank you for the super chat, DC. If Israel claims to be a Jewish state, they spit in the face of their own God. Were the 10 commandments merely suggestions? Is Talmudic law non-binding? Interesting. And thank you, Telasu? Question: where are the pro-Israel demonstrations on the scale? Where are any pro-Israel demonstrations? So I've seen some pro-Israel demonstrations basically as a counter to pro-Palestinian demonstrations, but not on that same scale. But I've also seen Jewish people protesting at the pro-Palestine rally in support of the Palestinian people with signs saying, "Stop the genocide." That's what I'm trying to tell you guys. Like, everyone that I know that's Jewish, none of them are Zionists. So there's a difference between Zionism and being Jewish. Thank you for the super sticker, Regime. And thank you for the super chat, Mark. Palestine hasn't been occupied since 2007, when Hamas took over both Egypt and Israel closed the borders. Egypt blew up tunnels Palestinians ran goods through. Do we condemn Egypt, who occupied Gaza 20 years? We condemn all occupation, Mark. Who is occupying right now? What is the fight about right now, Mark? Who's in power? Who controls the resources? Who lets the food come into Gaza and says the food can't come into Gaza? Who cuts off the electricity? Who stops the water, Mark? Thank you for the super sticker, Caleb. Miss me with all that. We're going to move on to the next story, which is about Garland Nixon. So Garland Nixon, he has a YouTube show called Garland Nixon. He also hosts a radio show in DC. I'm pretty sure that's how a lot of you probably heard of him before he had the YouTube show. But Garland Nixon actually just spoke at the United Nations in reference to the war in Ukraine. And I think you need to hear what he had to say. Let's go ahead and share this.
My name is Garland Nixon, and I'm a retired police official, a journalist, and in my opinion, a representative of the working class citizens of the United States. As a student of history, I recognize that the location of the United States has, with a few notable exceptions, shielded our land from the decimation of war. I also recognize that the proliferation of nuclear weapons has eliminated that geographical advantage, and the people of this nation face the same existential threat as the many nations that were literally flattened during 2 world wars. In February of 2022, Russia elected to enter the military conflict in Ukraine, and we, average working class citizens, were provided by our media with an assortment of shallow, simplistic, and often conflicting reasons for that action. Fortunately, many of us knew the truth about the potential for this escalation long before it flared up. We recall that in 2019, Alexei Arestovich, a close advisor to President Zelensky, was quoted as saying, with a probability of 99.9%, our price for joining NATO is a big war with Russia. We recall Professor John Mearsheimer's prophetic prediction that, quote, the West is leading Ukraine down the primrose path, and the end result is Ukraine is going to get wrecked. And lastly, we recall the list of security demands centered around NATO expansion that Russia issued on December 17th, 2021. Notwithstanding the ahistorical claims of Russian expansion or President Putin's hostility towards democracy, we find ourselves today in an extinction level crisis that can and must be resolved through diplomacy.
And we want to think about what's happening right now with Ukraine, right? When they talk about Ukraine going down that troubling path, look at where they are now. And what's going to happen to this country after this conflict is over?
That was initially proposed in mid-December of 2021. Since the February 2022 entrance of the Russian military into the battle, the United States government has injected over $100 billion in arms and other forms of assistance to the conflict. A significant portion of that assistance took the form of small but powerful armaments. Many of these handheld weapons possess incredible destructive capabilities. There are shoulder-fired anti-aircraft weapons known as man-pads that can easily take down a civilian passenger aircraft, and anti-tank rockets that could be used with devastating effect on a convoy of civilian vehicles, such as the ones that many diplomats in this room routinely utilize to traverse their respective nations. The injection of these military-grade weapons into an environment as unstable as Ukraine is beyond irresponsible. In the instance of the European Union, it may end up being suicidal for many of its citizens. We are already confronted with instances of weapons from this conflict finding their way via the black market to Africa, which means that the nations of Europe are most likely already inundated with dangerous military hardware. The leaders of Europe must recognize that this conflict will eventually come to a conclusion. And when that happens, the powerful weapons of war that will have flooded their society will not simply melt away.
I just want to pause here for a second and talk about those weapons that have ended up elsewhere. The US government has not issued a response in reference to that. It was a couple months ago we covered the story that people were saying like they found some of those weapons ended up in countries in Africa, and there just seemed to be no response. How did they get there? You know how dangerous that is, the fact that military grade weapons can end up in the hands of civilians? No response, no accountability. Almost as if they're trying to provoke them to. Let's go on.
Most violent and criminal elements in Europe and beyond will possess the ability to threaten the internal stability of any nation that they choose. They will need no army or organized structure. A lone wolf attacker with an anti-aircraft or an anti-tank missile will be able to destabilize an entire nation with a single act. Who amongst us would be comfortable taking a commercial flight if criminal or terrorist actors shoot down a civilian plane in Paris, London, or Brussels? I can guarantee that just the mention of this potential tragedy is eliciting a fear response in those of us who routinely travel on commercial aircraft in the European region. I only wish that the inevitable ad hominem attacks against me as a speaker would change this outcome. It would be a fair and reasonable burden to accept if those who would diminish the obvious nature of my assertions could somehow alter the ghastly inevitability that the innocent citizens of Europe will be forced to endure. I implore the honorable members of this committee to push for a peaceful resolution of this conflict and an expansive project to locate and gather up the brutal weapons that will surely threaten the lives and livelihoods of the hardworking citizens of the European continent and beyond.
It's something you really need to think about, the fact that nobody from the US government or the Ukrainian government has said, okay, we need to send people to those countries to try to gather those weapons. Like, you have military grade weapons just kind of floating around in the mist, can get into the hands of anyone. And there just seems to be no care in the world, no concern, no worry, no stress. Like I said, you know, it almost seems like they're not trying to take care of this situation, because it's almost as if they want them to use it against, not against us, against their own people. Just let them have it. Look at where it ends up. Countries are in Africa. It's crazy that Garland even has to come to the UN and tell them this.
I need not recite word for word the innumerable recent quotes from Western media outlets implying that the argument for a Ukrainian victory against the Russian army is no longer plausible. According to reliable sources, the Ukrainian military has lost more personnel in the last few months than the US military lost in a decade of fighting in its ill-fated misadventure in Vietnam. The highly trained and powerfully equipped NATO-sponsored military that opened the conflict has been wiped out and replaced by conscripts. These minimally trained troops are being placed in a hopeless situation. Those who claim to support Ukraine must recognize that putting civilians in camouflage fatigues, giving them a few weeks of training, and setting them off against impregnable defensive positions is an unconscionable act of human sacrifice.
It would be the same as if I came up to one of you and I said, okay, all the actual soldiers are gone, so we need you to fight. I'm just going to train you for like a week or so, and then you just take it from there. Hey, in combat? Could you imagine? Just scooping up anybody. We need more people, so we're making you come fight because the trained soldiers that we had are gone. This is a dangerous thing. And so I've continued to say that if you care about the Ukrainian people, if you care about the Russian people, then there should be a call for a peace negotiation and de-escalation, not escalation. Because I think we all know where this is headed. We've already talked about this before. Cy Hirsch has reported on this extensively, that Ukraine is losing. They're really struggling. Russia's huge. Plus, they got a friend next door called China. You really think that Russia's going to let them win this? They're not. To me, this makes no sense. Like, de-escalate. It only makes sense if you're trying to profit off of war, which is what our country does.
Supporting a nation obviously entails ensuring that the safety and prosperity of its citizens are secure. Recent statements and advertisements by U.S. supporters of this conflict makes it clear that they are unconcerned with the human consequences of their decisions and clearly demonstrate a reckless disregard for the lives of the Ukrainian people. Recently, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham stated that, quote, Russians dying, the best money U.S. has ever spent.
Lindsey Graham has to be one of the biggest war hawks in DC. But not only that, he has said some of the most vile things about people. I am shocked. I'm still shocked to this day. There hasn't been some kind of push to get him out of DC. That people still continue to vote for this guy. It is, and I lived in South Carolina. I didn't understand it then either. Like, why do you continue to vote for this guy? He's not doing anything for people in South Carolina. But that's how Lindsey Graham sees people abroad.
In this amoral but incredibly enlightening statement, Senator Graham openly exposed that he viewed the appalling numbers of dead Ukrainian soldiers as an insignificant and reasonable price to pay to achieve his ultimate political goal of weakening the Russian military. With supporters like Senator Graham, Ukraine is in little need of adversaries.
It's easy to tell people in conflict and with war, it's a price to pay. It just comes along with it, right? Like the civilians there's gonna be civilian casualties. It's easy to say that when you're not the casualty. It's easy to say that when it's happening in another country and it's not happening in your country. If the United States government, if we had as much conflict in this country in reference to war, like if we were the ones being attacked all the time and we were the ones having to live with buildings next to us that have just been demolished and there's just rubble, next to us that has not been cleaned up or anything like that. And we had to breathe in the air from the chemicals that happened through war. If we had to live like that, if we had to figure out how we were going to get water, how we were going to get food, because all our entire state or whatever, or our entire country was destroyed the way that Yemen was, the way that they're doing Syria, the way that they did Afghanistan, we would not say that. We would not say, well, that's just part of the casualties of war. The people who usually say that are the people who are not affected and the countries that are not affected.
Additionally, it is critical that we consider the economic health of the hardworking people of Europe. As the makers of the aforementioned weapons of war celebrate outrageous profits, the loss of cost-effective Russian energy has set in motion a deadly downward economic spiral. The people of Europe are facing another cold winter with unaffordable heating costs and the very real prospect of industrial collapse.
Now, we talked about this last year during the winter, how they had the really expensive heating bills that they couldn't pay for, like in the UK. So people had to go to warm banks in the UK they were basically heating facilities. We talked about this last year. Now we're going into another winter. So this is still a problem. And that's what I'm telling people, that like this energy problem has not gone away. So when Joe Biden talks about, oh, everybody's doing so much better now, no, this is still an issue.
The potential for such an economic catastrophe has already sowed the seeds of political and cultural instability. Governments have begun to fall, and should the current Middle East crisis metastasize, a winter without Russian energy would result in the immediate and precipitous demise of the European economic bloc. I only wish that this claim were over the top and improbable. It is clear and obvious that the prosperity of the European region is facing great peril, and we must ask ourselves whether it is moral and just to destroy centuries of economic and cultural advancement for an esoteric ideological battle. Today, we face an incredibly dangerous situation, a situation that could, without notice, spiral out of control and turn our beautiful planet into an icy, uninhabited rock. However, despite the existential threat that this conflict represents, I am pleased to bring good news to this committee. Despite the devastation and loss of life that this war has visited upon the European continent, there is hope. We have a roadmap for peace, and if reasonable diplomatic-minded leaders can find the intellectual and moral wherewithal to act with haste and determination, a resolution for this conflict can give birth to a security structure that ensures peace and stability on the European continent and beyond.
Let me pause here for just a second. There was something I want to add in reference to the solution about peace. It was a couple of months ago when I covered that story where it was actually Putin and Xi Jinping. They actually met to talk about like a possible peace negotiation in reference to this particular conflict. They talked about other issues as well, but they also talked about this. And then it seemed like right after they met, that meeting happened. The next thing I know, there was another headline that the US government was sending more weapons to Ukraine. So you see, we've seen this happen before. Because when we talk about the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, which actually could have settled this issue between Israel and Palestine back in 2002, one of the things that I read to you from that article was the fact that once they started talking about the peace negotiations, what happened? Weapons came in and there was an attack. So that's what I'm saying. Like, they don't want peace. They want what's profitable for the war machine. They want to continue to feed the war machine. So that being said, here we are again with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where they had that discussion, they had that meeting to talk about peace negotiation. And it seemed like, from what I saw from the meeting they had, it seemed like Vladimir Putin was open to that. And then the US government sends more aid to Ukraine, weapons to Ukraine. Because the US government doesn't want peace.
However, the first and most important act required to set this desired outcome into motion is that the Western nations immediately cease contributing to the influx of weapons and secure the lives of the frontline Ukrainian troops by offering a unilateral ceasefire with a guarantee wherein non-aligned nations, such as those in Africa and Latin America, are authorized to ensure that this agreement is not compromised. This is not to be confused with propositions for a ceasefire that simply allow the Ukrainian military to rearm for the furtherance of future conflict. Due to the nuclear potential of this conflict, developing nations have a stake in the outcome, and therefore they must be involved in its resolution. I call upon this committee to live up to its name. This unity of nations has been called upon to ensure world security. From the instance that nuclear weapons were introduced into the military sphere, this time was inevitable. A time in which irresponsible leaders would threaten the existence of humankind was sure to visit itself upon humans. However, we must also remember that this inevitability was the very foundation for the creation of this committee. I ask you to take action and live up to your calling. Stop the flow of weapons into the Ukrainian theater, push for an end to hostilities, and work for a resolution of the European security that takes into account the security of the European nations, the Russian Federation, and the overall threat that this conflict presents to the existence of humanity. I conclude by reminding you that even as we seek to conclude this conflict with a peaceful resolution, a second wind of ill fate blows across our planet. Of the three major nuclear superpowers, the one in which I reside is pumping billions of dollars of weapons into the border of one and literally into a province of the other. The reckless act of destabilizing and weaponizing Ukraine has a loathsome and vile twin on the Chinese island of Taiwan. Again, I remind you of the words of the ever hawkish Senator Lindsey Graham, who, when speaking about the Ukraine conflict, referenced Taiwan by stating that, quote, "They are going to fight to the last man in Taiwan." This suicidal march towards nuclear conflict must be stopped. And I beseech you to begin the process immediately by stopping the flow of weapons to Ukraine and expediting a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Thank you and good day.
Now, one of the questions that I have, and I'll actually, I'm gonna reach out to Garland and ask him about this. When they have these speeches at the UN, what happens after? Because I think that's the part where many of us were just like, oh, okay, what happens next? Like, does the UN, respond? Do they send a message to the president of the United States? Like, where does it go from here? So we've done a couple of these. We had Garland Nixon's speech. We had Danny Haifong's address to the UN. Max Blumenthal addressed the UN. Air Mate, we covered, addressed the UN. There's been a couple of them that we've covered on the show. But I'm just curious, like, what happens after? Like, what are the next steps? See, this is why I couldn't address the UN, because at the end of the conversation, I would say, so what happens next? What are the next steps? They would just probably just look at me and laugh and say, like, oh my God, is she serious? What is she talking about? I'm like, no, seriously, what's the next step, guys? I don't know. I'm just curious. We'll go ahead and finish up here. And there's Garland there.
All righty. Well, that was it. I really enjoyed it. I took my time and wrote it, and I felt as though I played with it a little bit, but I felt as though the things that I said were obvious and needed to be said. The funny thing about it was, the real funny thing about it was, after I gave the speech, all the nations were around, and I looked at the guy from the UK, whoever their representation ambassador, whatever the case may be, right? And he gave me the, as we used to say when I was a kid, he gave me the hairy eyeball. He's looking at me with this mean look, and I just looked back at him and smiled. Because the Zen thing, you always respond in a way that people don't expect, and it can't be contrived. So he looked at me, and I looked back with a smile. That was the highlight of my visit to the UN, to tell you the truth. And I feel as though that was representative of the people who want war versus the people who want peace. The people who are the pro-war, the neocons, they look at us with this, we hate you. And we look back and say, we don't hate you. We don't hate anybody. Right. We want everybody to be able to pursue their life goals, to enjoy themselves, for everybody to be treated equally, all that kind of stuff. And we don't have to go around screaming about it. So thanks a lot, everybody. That's it. I'm going to run.
Yeah. So Garland brought up a really good point there, like when, and I think this is something that I think Bree's really good at doing this too. Like when people are like yelling at you, or you face those types of people, whether it's the United Nations or whether it's in media as well, it's always great to just look back and give a good, big, fat, juicy smile. Just shine a big old smile at them, just be like, thanks so much for having me on. You can win the argument with your words. And the way that I talk on this show, sometimes I get a little like, little on this show. But when I go into other shows, like I'm very cautious of not letting my emotions do the talking and letting my words do the talking. So I try to be careful with that, because then the first thing people say is, oh, she's getting mad. She's getting angry. Here it comes. And then the next thing you know, people aren't paying attention to what you're saying. They're paying attention to your emotion in it and all. So it's different when I'm on this show. But if I'm going on to someone else's show and they're trying to argue with me about a particular topic, Flash that beautiful smile. Let them see your pearly whites and keep it moving. Keep it moving. All right, let's go to some of the comments here. Steve Wolfbrand says, we watch Garland. Awesome. Yeah, Garland's channel is really cool. I know, like, he interviews a lot of people in reference to foreign policy. So, you know, I guess everybody's paying attention to foreign policy now, considering the conflicts that are going on. But if that's more your jam, like, Garland's channel is really good on that. Thank you. Stay blessed. Unfuck your mind. There is no special group of people who are entitled. One world, one love. Let's get together and feel all right. What's up, Scott? Thank you. In 2020, liberals were riding with Biden. In 2024, they're genociding with Biden to save democracy? Oof. And Lucas says, Sabs, you have to do it. ROFL. Yeah, it would be funny, like, if I went there, because I would seriously be like, no, seriously, like, what are the next steps? Are we going to have a second meeting? You guys going to contact some people? Like, what's happening here? Let me know. Let me know. Okay. Speaking of what's happening here, Justin Trudeau has been making some really strange decisions. I don't know. I always kind of look towards Canada as, like, you know, my neighbor to the north, as a country that was a little bit more chill than the US. There's some things you can do in Canada that you can't do in the US, right? Like, you go to Montreal, for example, they have like all nude, like, strip clubs, and like in certain states in the US, you don't have that. Not that that's important. That's just an example. But there are certain things that you can get away with there. And so the past year and a half, Justin Trudeau's decisions, policy decisions, and the way that he has chosen to come after people in Canada because they don't agree with his policies or because they're not a part of that status quo, it's just very odd. And it makes me give Trudeau a side eye. But there's something else that he did recently that I think you want to see. But before so, I haven't said this. So go ahead and smash that like button if you have not had a chance to do so. Thank you. That helps me with the algorithm. But he's up to his old bag of tricks again. You know, he wants to come after people's bank accounts. What? Let's get into it. Russell Brand actually brought this up. That's how I found out about this. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. What is it going to take for people in Canada to vote that guy out? Let's get into this clip here. The state, the government just freezing your bank account not because you did something wrong financially, not because you're writing bad checks or something, if people still do checks anymore, but because you disagree. What the hell is happening in Canada? That's all I have to say. What is happening in Canada? Pause here for a second, because Bree was talking not about this particular story, but she was talking about the fact of not hiring someone because you don't agree with their position, right? So we'll leave it at that and not get into too much detail, because that could be a whole nother story. But the thing is like, so because you disagree with the person, whatever the issue may be, does that give the government the right to freeze your bank account or to shut down your bank account? You see, this actually speaks to a much larger issue, because one of the things that we've discussed on the show is that there are other commentators that have had their PayPal, their Patreon, Venmo, Cash App, Give, Send, Go, all of those things shut down, and they've been banned on those platforms just simply because the narrative that they have, more in particular with Russia and Ukraine, but there's others as well. But the narrative that they have is not what those platforms agree with. And so they don't think that person should get paid for their labor. Now, this is now a labor issue, right? So if those platforms ban you and that is how you get your money from your job, well, then you're going to resort to other means, right? Now, what if you just said, okay, I'm going to set up something where it can just go directly, into my bank account, not using those platforms. But then if Justin Trudeau comes in and bans your bank account and shut down your bank account, well, now you have no way to get access to money. Let's continue here because I want you to actually be able to see this. Banks in Canada follow all applicable laws and regulations in carrying out their operations in keeping with their commitment to protect the integrity of Canada's financial system. All financial service providers, including banks covered by the Federal Emergencies Act, will need to diligently implement the required measures as stipulated by the government in corresponding emergency economic measures order, which are not expected to impact the vast majority of customers. Okay, but it's not a matter of how many people it impacts. It's the problem that it's impacting someone at all. Even if it's just one person, that's still a problem. For you to shut down someone's means of being able to get funds. This is fascism. And it's just, they're trying to penalize the people who donated to the trucker convoy. First, they were just trying to penalize those that were a part of it, that participated in it, which I still disagreed with. Like I said, you ain't got to agree with the cause that they're fighting for. But to shut down someone's bank account, I did not agree with. Now they're going after those who donated to that cause, to those truckers. So all of this is traced. This is insane, you guys. What's next? Next time they're going to come after people who just donate to any old protest. If it's a protest that Justin Trudeau doesn't agree with, they're going to come after you too. And then what if something like this spread to the US? What if the US government started to say, oh, well, you supported that Black Lives Matter protest. You supported the anti-war rally. You donated money to that event. We're going to shut down your bank account. The point that I'm trying to make is this: fascism spreads. So if this is happening in Canada, which is to the north of us, there is a possibility they could start doing that here in the United States. That's why I say foreign policy is domestic of the act. So this is another thing that Canada is doing. Again, this is all Justin Trudeau. They're trying to make it now that like streamers, so that's YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and they have Snapchat on here. People still use Snapchat. Anyway, they're trying to make it to where like streamers are actually like, it's like they have to basically report to the government. What kind of mess is this? And let me tell you, I've had some good fun times in Montreal, okay? They have great food. They have great beer. The people are pretty chill, unless I'm going to a sports game, we don't agree on the sports teams. But other than that, I've had some pretty cool, chill times in Montreal. I had fun in Toronto. But what the hell is this? That would be like, imagine if all of us on YouTube, and we'll say Twitch too, they should add Twitch to that. All of us on like YouTube or Twitch or whatever, what if we had to actually report to the US government? What kind of mess is that? Or register with the US government? What is happening? I feel like we're getting closer and closer to Majority Report. Minority Report, not Majority Report. Not Majority Report, that's the show. But Minority Report, the movie. That's what it's starting to feel like. They want to watch and see everything that we do. They just want to have surveillance, mass surveillance over all of us. And this goes into the facial recognition thing too, where I told you that's another way for them to kind of have control over us and what we're doing. James Brown told Eddie Murphy back in the day when Eddie Murphy was starting to blow up. It's a true story. James Brown told Eddie Murphy to take your money and bury it in the ground. Maybe James was right.
On your team, the legacy media may not be on your team, but I'll tell you who's on our team and therefore yours. Stick a meal with.
All right, let me pause. Let me see what it says. I think it just got suspended. Everybody's getting suspended. Copyright. It should come back, Eric. It should come back because it's copyright. Can you hear me? Yeah, it's copyright. Hold on. I don't know what was copyright. It should come back, Eric. You can come on here if you want. Usually when it's copyright, it comes back if I take it down. Let's see. Let me see what it says. Oh, it's a copyright match. God, man.
Maybe it was the Russell Brand.
It says it was interrupted. It doesn't say it was suspended. That's the thing that I got, the notification I got, which means something that I showed had copyright.
It was probably, they probably did the Russell Brand because that's what was playing.
Yeah, I think it was. Let me tell the people.
I'm giving people the links to the Rumble and the Rockfin.
Okay. Let me double check. It's not a strike. It just says it was interrupted. Last time this happened, it came back. Streams are interrupted when copyright content is detected. But I don't know what the copyright claim is. It's probably Russell Brand. That sucks.
Yeah, so YouTube has like software and stuff that looks for matches for copyright, and they'll get a match, and then I don't know if they have a human look at it or not, but
I never, like, these aren't things I would get copyright for. I don't think. Like, I've never. Let me see.
Oh, we're back.
I'm back. Okay.
Yep. Just popped back. So I guess we'll carry
I'm
on
back.
somewhat normally.
It was the Russell Brand. So I think that's what it was. So we won't be able to. I'm not going to be able to clip that. Usually, like, they'll tell me what it was. But I won't find out till later on tonight. So I'll let you know, Eric. It was probably the Russell Brand thing. But that's weird because, like, I've never gotten that for Russell Brand before. So that's weird. Oh, let me see. Okay, now it says it's back. So I don't know what the copyright thing was. That's the thing. Oh, well, I guess I'll find out. Hey guys, I'm back. Yeah, copyright. I'm guessing it was the Russell Brand story because that's what was playing. So he probably copyrighted his content on YouTube since he's mainly on Rumble, but that's okay. We'll go to the next story. I should be good. I know. I see the comments. Bad Sabby got branded. Yeah, I know. Oh, what is it? YouTube owns his content now? Okay, so I can't show his stuff. Okay, gotcha. All right, sorry, guys. Sorry. All right, let's go to the final story then, which is Glenn Greenwald. Let me go ahead and put this up here. Okay, so I know I can share this one. So Glenn Greenwald actually just had a recent interview on Rising talking about censorship in reference to the Palestine-Israel conflict, right? So there are certain censorship things that are happening. And I mentioned that France was one of the countries that they're trying to ban pro-Palestinian protests. So they're one of the countries doing that. Although, you know, I told you before, the French don't really listen to Macron like that. They still do their own thing. But Glenn Greenwald was very vocal about this on Rising. So I want to go ahead and get into that clip here.
Course, comes after France banned all pro-Palestinian protests in the country. And journalist Glenn Greenwald joins us now to weigh in. Glenn, we are so happy to have you back with us. Thank you for being here and, talk to us about these threats we're seeing to free speech and civil protest all over the globe, but in Western countries that reminds me and probably reminds you of how readily and easily civil liberties were abandoned in the U.S. as a response to what happened on 9/11.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right framework. Obviously, after 9/11, most Americans, I know I was included among them, I lived in Manhattan at the time, felt a sense of great rage over the attacks that had been perpetrated that killed 3,000 American civilians, most decent people by definition, felt similarly about the attacks that Hamas carried out in Israel on Saturday. And yet the lesson that I thought we had learned from 9/11 is that when we follow our rage and we allow the government to claim authoritarian powers, enact the Patriot Act days later because everybody's so angry and they can exploit that, we end up going down paths that we find at best counterproductive and in many ways shameful. I think the key here, Robbie, is that the EU, these EU governments, Germany, France, have taken a position in this war. They are on the side of Israel. They have made that abundantly clear. And note that they're not banning all protests regarding this war. They're only banning protests that are either critical of Israel or pro-Palestinian, meaning protests that are a deviation from their policies. You're still free to have pro-Israel protests. You're allowed to call for the destruction of Gaza. What you're not allowed to do are have the kind of protests where you express views that dissent from government policy. And that's what I think makes this so alarming.
Glenn, that part is really important. I think what Glenn was saying right there, like I said, again, if your narrative is similar to the narrative that mainstream media has, if your narrative is similar to the narrative that CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News have in reference to this conflict with Israel and Palestine, and also in reference to Russia and Ukraine as well, you know, you'll be all right. You'll be all right. But the moment you start to, and it's really interesting, I have to say this in 2023, but the moment you start to look out for those that are oppressed, with the Palestinian people are the ones that are oppressed, you're seen as problematic. So a lot of people that have been speaking from that perspective have been smeared. We've been called all different types of names. People are saying that we're like pro-Hamas or whatever, and all this kind of stuff, and that we're cheering on what they did, etc. The thing is this: when people are oppressed, and the people who are oppressing them are actually, in this particular case, the state of Israel is the one who is oppressing the Palestinian people. You have to remember, the oppressor has all the resources. They have all the power. So what are the oppressed supposed to do? Especially when they're still getting attacked, even if they're following all the rules. So what you see happening right now with a country like France choosing to, we're going to ban these types of protests, get ready for it, because it's going to be other countries that take heed to this as well and say, you can't do this type of protest, even if it's a peaceful protest. And I argued years ago that the protest can only be peaceful. I argued even back then, they didn't want people protesting at all. They don't want people in the streets at all. So that's really what it is about. Let's continue.
You've also been tracking some, I loathe to talk about hypocrisy, but some backtracking that some prominent critics of these kind of speech overreaches have been doing in the wake of this particular conflict. People like you, I will say my co-hosts here, and Michael Schellenberger have been very consistent on these issues, but not everyone has been the same way. Who, in your view, have been sort of the biggest offenders here?
Well, it's just so interesting because over the last 4 to 5 years, censorship has become a primary weapon of the neoliberal elites or the American liberal left. The kind of entire Democratic Party has defended things like the U.S. security state pressuring big tech to censor on COVID, on Ukraine, on Russiagate, and now in this war. And conservatives have been almost unanimously united against this sort of thing, which is why I found myself in alignment with them on these issues. And I have a lot of experience arguing with left liberals who defend these censorship policies, invoking the rationale that you guys started off the segment by detailing, the ones that I outlined. And now I find myself seeing conservatives overtly cheering, not just the censorship that they have been so loudly opposing over the last few years, but the theories invoked to justify that censorship. One in particular is Dave Rubin, who basically really built his platform, his entire platform, in opposition to things like cancel culture and censorship. Yep. And he went in response to this news that France imposed a nationwide ban on all Palestinian protests and said, oh, maybe there's a chance for the West after all. As though, I guess now the way to save the West is by empowering neoliberal officials in France to ban political speech that they disagree with. And this is...
Let's pause here for just a second. Isn't it interesting how some of the people that were very much against cancel culture a couple of years ago are now pro cancel culture. Like now they're like people like Dave Rubin. Like, it's really weird. It's funny how it's not cancel culture when it's an issue that affects them directly or is an issue that they're really passionate about. All of a sudden it's okay to cancel people. But when it's an issue that did not affect them and that they were not passionate about, it was not okay to cancel people. So which is it? Either you're for cancel culture or you're against cancel culture. You don't get to do this. Yay, I agree with cancel culture when it's an issue that, you know, I disagree with. That's not how this works. So you see what's happening when it comes to this particular issue, this conflict with Israel and Palestine. We're starting to see people's true colors. We're starting to see people like shift and kind of, you know, move in different ways because it's an issue that is close to them.
Something you're seeing throughout the American right, not all, by no means all, but a lot of people who typically mock cancel culture, mock the call for free speech, for censorship, now suddenly not just approving of it, but demanding it.
Yeah, that's a great example. A more good examples, I thought, was the overreaction to the statements put out by the Harvard students, solely blaming Israel for what has happened. I criticized that statement. It's gotten a lot of criticism from people on the right, and I think it was fair to call those students out. Of course, that is, free speech as well. But then there was an entire, we're gonna blast their names all over everywhere. We're going to make sure they can never get a job, anything of that sort. And then there's been a split on the right and whether that's the right approach. Megyn Kelly saying we should do that. Candace Owens and Vivek Ramaswamy saying, okay, wait a minute, isn't this the very cancel culture we decry? I feel similarly to you that there's so much hypocrisy on the kind of cancel culture ethos of free speech environment, and then certainly on the policies of free speech, these European governments, we cannot allow in the U.S. this kind of thing to take hold. I think our First Amendment prohibits it technically, but we've seen all the ways American government bureaucrats have used to get around the very hard protections, firm protections of the First Amendment.
Whether you agree with the protests or not. And this part is very key. And I said this about the trucker convoy. I said, listen, you don't have to agree with what they're protesting over. But if you start saying, no, they shouldn't be able to do it, then it's going to become a domino effect. And that's going to affect other protests as well, where other people are going to be like, they're going to be affected. Even some of the issues that you do agree with can also be affected. So I think it's important that we stress that part because, like I said, you don't want it. Perfect example, when Trump was removed from Twitter, there were a lot of people cheering really excited on the left. But then the left started to face censorship too. There were people that got demonetized on YouTube that same year. Actually, I think it was the same month. There were people that were deplatformed, etc. So the point that I'm trying to make is be careful who you wish that upon because you don't want that to happen to you.
I think those are excellent examples. One that really bothered me in particular, because it's not just a pundit, but a fairly high-ranking government official, was Josh Hawley, who, like most conservatives or from that wing of the Republican Party, have been calling for things like defund the FBI, or at least insisting that they be investigated for their politicization of their powers. And Josh Hawley went and said, I want the FBI to investigate people who are signing petitions that he thinks go over the line. In other words, calling for the FBI to do things like COINTELPRO and the kinds of things that gave it such a bad name in the 60s and 70s, and now again during the Trump era, meaning not investigating crimes, but investigating people who have the wrong ideology. And I think the cancel culture thing on some level is also disturbing, though not as bad as when state officials do it. But you're exactly right, Robbie. I thought the whole point was, the leftists who want to get people fired really do believe those views are dangerous. They really believe those views incite violence against minorities. They feel just as strongly as people on the right who think that pro-Hamas statements should be made illegal or criticism of Israel should be made illegal. You either believe in the principle or you don't.
That's you got to be careful. You got to be careful with it.
I wonder if you had any insight on this story that's been going around about 3 MSNBC Arab hosts being taken off the air. Of course, we both used to work with Mehdi Hassan at The Intercept. They seem not to have made any statements denying the veracity of the claim they were taken off the air. But MSNBC has pushed back, saying that Ali Velshi was traveling and that was the cause of him not doing his nightly show. People have wondered if Mehdi Hasan would make a statement. It doesn't seem like he has been willing to do so far, one way or another. And some people have taken that silence, his failure to reject the idea that he was intentionally pulled off, as speaking volumes. Do you have any insight there?
I think Ayman is one of the best journalists at MSNBC, and he has been incredibly insightful and a lot of his commentary, brave as well. He went on the air right away when the climate was very kind of repressive, and he's one of the three who has reportedly been taken off the air. So I've spoken to some people in MSNBC, and I think the point you're making is exactly right, Bree. If I were the subject of news reports saying I had been censored by my corporate employer and it wasn't true, I, of course, would run forward to say this is not true. I wouldn't want people thinking I had been censored and I just swallowed it silently, because it's devastating to your credibility if that's true. If it is true, I would think it is even more disturbing that they are standing by silently and allowing it to happen without objecting. You know, it is true these people have been on the air. They've been part of panels. They've been doing some reporting. The issue, though, is have they been removed from their hosting positions? They all have their own shows, either on the weekend or on streaming services. And it seems as though it is true that the shows they host, that they typically anchor, have not been airing. And I agree with you completely. They have the obligation as journalists to stand up and either say, yes, these reports are true, or they're not. And the fact that they're silent, I think, makes it even more alarming.
I just want to add, for those who are not aware, Mehdi Hasan and there were two other Muslim journalists that were part of MSNBC. It has been brought to people's attention that they have not been hosting their shows since this conflict with Israel and Palestine started. So their shows have just been off the air. Now, MSNBC has made the claim that they were on vacation or something like that. And I just thought to myself, really? All three of them at the same time? You know, it's something like that. And they're not saying anything. Mehdi Hasan has not spoken out about it. The other guys, I can't remember their names, but the other ones, they haven't really, said it. So I think, again, this is another example of mainstream media trying to silence people. But this time it seems like they're trying to silence their own commentators that have their own shows on the network. So again, going back to the censorship, whether you agree with what is said or not, that does not give you the right or the authority to tell that person that they're not allowed to speak. And this is where I think we have to be very careful. There are many people that have come onto the show that I disagree with. There are stories that I cover on the show where it's a politician that's speaking about something, but I disagree with what he's saying. But I think it's important that we don't tell people that they're not allowed to speak, because this does spread. It's not just going to happen to people on the right. It's not just going to happen to people on the left. It's going to happen to people across the board, especially if you don't fit with the status quo narrative.
I wanted to get your take on another issue. I'm hearing a lot of mainstream reporters, the Ben Collins of the world from NBC, claiming misinformation has never been more out of control on social media on X than it is now. Even though I'm seeing, I remember a lot of erroneous fog of war reports, during other violent events, during shootings, during bombings, during natural disasters. They're saying it's the worst it's ever been. Although, I'm seeing community notes, which I think is a really actually good feature on X, correcting in some cases, extremely quickly, some of the bad information that's spreading. So, how do you respond?
I just wanted to pause, Robbie, there and just explain community notes for those of you who are not on Twitter. So now there's this feature where if you tweet something that may not be true or it may be problematic, community notes just pops underneath your tweet and will either correct you or tell your audience that either something that you said is not true, or they'll give them more context about what you're saying. Some people kind of look at community notes as a snitch. Some people, community notes called out Cenk Uygur when he announced he was running for president, and they said that legally he can't be president because he was born in Istanbul, Turkey. So community notes does things like that.
On to how social media and how mainstream media is handling what's going on right now.
So 2 points. This is historical revisionism. They're trying to say that ever since Elon Musk took over Twitter and got rid of content moderators, which is a euphemism for censors, that now there's this sudden flow explosion of disinformation. Anyone with a memory that's functioning very well recalls that these same media outlets were complaining about Facebook, Google, and Twitter prior to Elon Musk in the Jack Dorsey era, allowing way too much disinformation. They've always wanted more censorship, Robbie. They've always claimed that not censoring enough spawns disinformation. And I think the key thing with this term disinformation is who gets to decide what is disinformation. People like Ben Collins were the ones spreading the CIA conspiracy theories about Trump being subject to blackmail by Vladimir Putin because he had sex tapes he was holding over his head, or lying that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. These people are the least qualified people to decree what is and is not disinformation. And I think you're right. Letting the market decide, the kind of marketplace of ideas, either through community notes or responding, is by far a more effective way than trying to empower centralized authority to decree what is true and what is false, which is easily abused, and no one is competent to do that.
Thank you so much for weighing in on this, and people should continue to follow your coverage of it over on your show. Glenn, it's always such a pleasure.
Great.
All right, and there goes Glenn. So oh, what's up? Say hello to Rome, you guys. I love y'all so freaking much. We love you too, Rome. What's up? What's up? Yeah, community notes is a trip because, like, if you're not really trying to snitch on yourself, community notes will snitch on you for you. Don't worry about it. Community notes got you. Okay, so for those who are asking me what happened, so apparently you can't play Russell Brand on YouTube now. So my live stream, it came back. So that's why I just stayed there, because I got the notification says it was interrupted, not suspended, not taken down, because of copyright match. And I don't have a copyright strike, but that means that what I was playing at that point in time now has copyright. So for those watching, and I'll tell the other commentators as well, don't play Russell Brand's show on your channel. I never had a problem with that before, but now apparently it's a problem, because maybe I'm wondering if maybe Rumble now owns the Russell Brand content, because his show was demonetized on YouTube. So I'm wondering if maybe they own that now. But yeah, apparently I can't play Russell Brand on here now. So sorry, guys. I'm sorry. Let me go to some of the comments here. And I do have a hard stop tonight, so I want to make sure I slide through. Rick says, back in the day here in Texas, we had all nudes, but it had to be outside city limits. Lucky for me. Okay. Thank you, DC. Canada is a literal monarchy. People forget. Cup of Joy says, cash under my mattress? Maybe. Corey says, Charlie Murphy can afford another couch. Yes, true. That's true. That sucks. You guys aren't going to get to see that clip now. I'll have to just, yeah, that sucks, because I wouldn't even finish the clip yet, but that sucks. Oh, well. Thank you for the super chat, Matt. We are next. Technological colonialism is being forced on us. Thanks, Matt. This is scary. Thanks, Corey. Sabby, they are also demonetizing channels who speak against Israel. Richard Medhurst just got. You can't show war videos. So one thing I haven't done is shown war videos. So I'm just letting you know you can't show those on here. Thank you, DC. Liberal racism is safe and effective, experts say. The Black Glitch said, it was a joke, Sabby. YouTube can make money off his content, but he can't. So I guess they own it. I was joking. It's okay. Yeah, I think Rumble might have ownership over it now. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, and then I do have to head out because I do have a hard stop. Thank you so much, Roger, for the tip on Rockfin. Garland might be getting his wish granted since Israel has now become America's main squeeze. We all might be getting our wish now with not arming anyone with our ammunitions becoming depleted. I feel you, Sabrina, with coming back with a nice, bright sunshine smile, but sometimes you need a little R.A. the rugged man where people get out of pocket. In case you don't know what I'm talking about, ask Tim Pool. I saw that interview. That was crazy. It's time to start reminding people that the Palestinians are Semites too. So let's shut down anti-Semitism mess. Hold up. Did Robbie just say Candace Owens is being consistent on cancel culture? Yeah, she had a tweet where she was arguing with Megyn Kelly, saying, hey, wait a minute. Isn't this the very cancel culture we have been wailing against during the lockdown crisis? Will wonders never cease? Megyn Kelly, 6th letter of the alphabet, that broad. Yeah, Megyn Kelly was not being consistent. That is for sure. Not being consistent. Okay. All right, guys. that is it for me. I do have a hard stop tonight, but so no call in tonight. We'll probably do call in Thursday night. But other than that, guys, you know how we do this. Look for, there should be an interview. Tomorrow I'm interviewing Katie Halper. It'll be recorded and then I will upload it as a premiere. So stay tuned for that. But other than that, I'm off on Wednesday. So see me again Thursday. I'll upload clips tomorrow. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.